Hi, everyone. This is Rico Figliolini, host of Peachtree Corners Life. We have a great guest today, Ruwa Romman, the Georgia State Rep District 97. Hey, Ruwa, how are you?
Hi, I'm good,
Yeah,
thanks. Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
yeah, good. Yeah, it's a beautiful day. Just came back from lunch, so all good. Mojitos at the forum. Excellent food.
Nice.
Yes.
Delicious.
And actually had breakfast this morning at First Watch. So I'm just good doing
Ooh.
dinner, lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner tonight at a new restaurant that's opening or a media preview called Dahlia's Restaurant at the um, Hilton Northeast here in Peachtree Corners.
Ooh. That
So
sounds good.
yeah,
Gotta go try it
hopefully
out.
we'll see how that food is. But we have more important things to discuss rather than food. So let's
I
get
don't know
into
if
it.
there's honestly, to me, that's like top number one priority in my
Is
life.
that
So
well? Actually, you know what? That's funny because in my family, growing up, Italian heritage, everything around the dinner table was game,
yep,
essentially.
yep,
So that's the best place to talk about stuff sometimes.
totally.
Um, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on because the session's over, um, and it's interesting because most people coming from New York, state reps and the House Senate seats and stuff, they're almost practically full time. They work like in session, like 9 months out of the year. Here in the state of Georgia, how many days is it that you're in
We're
session?
Yeah, we're about 40 days, all of January, all of February, and all of March. And
Okay.
so the intent, but the reason it's 40 days is because we also have like committee work days and we try to have some time to actually go through the bills. That
Okay.
gets harder at the end of it, but yeah, we're about 3 months of the year.
Wow. So there's quite a few bills that got looked at. I don't know what the numbers are. Maybe you could share that with us. How many actually got looked at and how many ended up passing? Quite a few passed, I think. And I think
Yeah.
Trump actually vetoed a few also.
Yep. Yeah,
Yes.
there were definitely some vetoes, of course. And actually, people can go on legis, so legis.ga.gov,
Hmm.
and you can actually see every single vote that we have done. We took a total of 890 votes this year, or I
800.
guess like this session. And that includes everything from attendance to bills. And to be clear, when we talk about a session, so there's like this year's session, and then last year's session is technically part of this one because it's a biennial.
Right.
So over the course of those, I guess like 8 month period, we took over 890 votes. Some of that was attendance, but a lot of it was on, bills and
Hmm.
moving things and stuff like that. So we voted on a lot. I think it was somebody said we had almost 1,200 bills that move
Wow.
through per like 4 month period,
Uh-huh.
but only about 200 of them get signed.
And that could be good because some of those bills aren't that great, right?
Yeah,
Um,
for
and this
sure.
is your first year, really, isn't it? Is it your first full year
This is
by
my
the
first
time
term. Yeah,
first
I'm
term?
a brand new freshman, as
Yeah,
they call us.
yeah.
What was really actually unique about us this year is about a third of the house was freshmen. So it gave us an opportunity to get to know each other and start on a blank slate. And I think it really
Mm,
made the dynamics of the house a little different in a
good,
good way.
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it could be frustrating. I'm sure Congress has their issues, but yeah.
Yeah, we're not
So
Congress. We actually voted on our speaker on the first try in about 15 minutes. So we did what we were supposed to.
yes, the grown-ups are in the room here in Georgia as opposed to
Correct.
Washington.
Correct. I don't know about the Senate, but the House, we're good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the Senate had its issues from what I understand, right? And if they weren't in session, probably would have been good in some cases.
It's a fun
Um,
rivalry. It's a fun
yes,
rivalry. So,
yes, I would think. One of the important bills that you mentioned before we started was House Bill 1105 that
mhm.
you wanted to talk about too. Why don't we start with that one? Let's
Sure.
go and because I don't you said that actually wasn't turned into legislation. I mean, it's legislation, but it was never signed, right?
No,
You didn't
it
get
was signed.
was it
So
signed?
unfortunately, and this seems to happen every election year, and I've actually noticed this. I try to watch a wide range of news,
Hmm.
or at least follow them, and a lot of news organizations suddenly will start talking about immigration, everything terrible with immigration. Suddenly it becomes every headline. And then as soon as election year is over, it literally
Hmm.
go. And I wish I was joking, but it literally does go away. And because of the tragedy that happened with Lake and Riley, all of a sudden, that was all we talked about for the last few weeks of session. And it was a real tragedy. I mean,
Hmm.
parents lost their daughter, friends lost a loved one. I mean, and it really shook the UGA campus. But I was left wondering with the fact that if the perpetrator was any other person, any other type of person, if it would have
Hmm.
gotten that kind of attention. And so what ended up happening was, unfortunately, some of my Republican colleagues used that as an opportunity to push through this bill. And what it does is it mandates that our local law enforcement, so like Gwinnett, Duluth, any local law enforcement is now required to do federal type work, which is ensure, or I guess check to make sure that somebody is a documented individual in the United States. There's a couple problems with that. One, it opens up the door for discrimination because now a police officer feels like they have to check people's papers, for lack of a better word, if they seem
Hmm.
suspicious. And frankly, those who don't look brown are not going to be impacted by this, but those who do could be. The other problem with the bill is that our driver's licenses are not good enough documentation to prove our citizenship, even though our licenses here in Georgia are verified. You could travel with them. I believe you can
Hmm.
even go to Canada driving using your license. And that creates a host of problems because now police can detain you for 48 hours, right? So if you've got a job, if you got kids, if you got any set of
Hmm.
responsibilities, suddenly your whole life can be derailed
Is that
mistakenly. Yeah,
is that prior to being arrested and booked
correct.
for a crime?
Correct.
So,
So it could be,
okay,
yeah.
go ahead. I'm sorry. I just
Yeah,
want
yeah.
to make
So
sure.
the problem is that the bill is written badly. I think a lot of times people think
Okay.
that because we pass a bill that it's written well. So there are some inconsistencies and lack of clarity. So like, do you actually have to be booked? Or could it be that somebody arrested you because you were being annoying and then they decide to hold you to check your immigration status? And the other piece about this bill, again, along with the contradictions that a lot of people don't realize is it defunds the police, and I mean that sincerely. If a local police department chooses not to engage on this basically quota system, they
Mhm.
could lose state funding as a result. And so it opens up this like wide range of issues from how we treat people, holding them unfairly, and now losing funding if they're not doing federal level work, which they're not getting more money for either.
So let me ask you this. I mean, from a common sense point of view, from the way I look at it, is that I can appreciate what you're saying as far as if you're being stopped on a road. Yes, I can see that. Discrimination is a will never go away, right? As much as we try. Um, but if you're arrested and you're booked for a crime, right,
Mhm.
and you're mugshot and everything, you're in prison, wouldn't that be a reasonable time then to check? Because you've committed a crime. Now, you're not judged yet, guilty, you haven't had a court case yet, but you've been booked, officially booked on that crime. Would that
Mhm.
not be a good time to check to see if they're
Sure.
an illegal immigrant?
Yeah, the problem with that though is who do they normally check to make sure is not an illegal immigrant, right? So you then have discrimination on that side of it. So not only are people more likely to be arrested, for example, if they are black or brown, they're now
Okay.
more likely to have that 48-hour hold. So they could have been released that night, but now because they have to check their immigration status, they're now being booked for 48 more hours. And suddenly the problems start to add up on each other.
Mhm.
And you end up having to spend valuable jail space on somebody that you wouldn't have normally had to hold to begin with, right? Because remember, our prisons and jails are already overcrowded.
Sure.
Our justice system is already at its brink, and so you're just adding more problems without actually providing any more funding is the other piece of it. So yeah.
So if you hold someone, not that I want to get into the weeds or anything, and I
No, you're fine.
understand bills are not God. Their intent, they sound good until they're not. And I heard you and Scott Hilton at a recent legislative panel, and you were giving out some details of particular bills. And had I not heard you say those facts about those bills, I'd be like, well, on the face of it, it sounds good. But
Yeah.
apparently it's not because it's this, right? So if I
Yeah.
was fact checking or if I was um, able to see further into it. And most citizens don't have that time or that interest to look at things further than a one sentence descriptive. But if a person's booked and they're in jail, they're booked for a reason, right? So they're going to
Yeah,
be there regardless for 24 to 48 hours anyway. So why not check the
yeah, yeah,
status
yeah.
during that
Um,
time?
totally. And so first off, I do like I feel like I do need to give voice to the fact that people who are more likely to be booked, and I've
Hmm.
seen this happen in front of me, are, again, black and brown folks. However, to your point, if they're already there, why not check? There's a couple problems with that. One, it can be really, really cumbersome, depending on the kind of software that they're using, whether or not they are on a special system that can do that kind of checking.
Hmm.
But that's why, for example, there is that 48-hour hold to give time for that check, is my point, right? So, in order
Hmm.
to allow for that check to happen, it does take up to 48 hours. And now you're holding somebody for 2 days that you normally wouldn't have to hold
Right.
otherwise.
Okay. Understood. I mean, in a perfect world, it would be fine. You release them as they normally would be released. And if
Mhm.
it comes back that they were illegal and they should have been held, then you go back out and get them at
Yeah.
the
And
residence that they
yeah,
declared, right?
federal agents then have to take care of that, right? That's what we spend federal money on this kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Yeah,
That's under the purview of the federal government and federal agents, because the other thing people don't realize is when you do this kind of stuff, it
hmm,
reduces there's already a lot of distrust between law enforcement and community members. And so
sure.
now you're reducing that little bit of trust. So someone, for example, who is seeing a crime or is a victim of domestic abuse and might be undocumented, they're now choosing not to seek help because they're
Hmm.
scared of this specific piece.
And again, going back to legislation and details, I mean, it could be then that it would be checked for felony level crimes versus a
Correct.
misdemeanor crime would be better. I mean,
Yeah,
so there's some pathway there, right, to be able
exactly.
to do
Yeah,
this. Okay.
and to be clear, we have, with things like this, a lot of times when I engage with my colleagues, I try really hard to engage on implementation because I
Hmm.
know sometimes we come at it from a different perspective. Like you said, it's not a perfect world. I wish it was, but
Yeah,
it's not. And so a lot of times we do offer straight up just technical feedback. But the reality is, especially in an election year, it sort of ends up with a mind of its own,
sure.
and kind of just, goes.
Yeah,
But in the meantime, I tell folks like, um, make sure your passport is up to date. We're now at
yeah,
that kind of situation.
yeah.
Truly, like I'm actually because an expired passport does not count. So if they were to book me, for example, for whatever reason, and my husband
Hmm.
brings my passport, it's expired, they will not accept it, and I could be held
Right,
for 48 hours. So yeah,
right. Yeah. Difficult. Yeah. National identification card. That's what
exactly.
it comes down to at some point, I guess.
Yep. Yep.
Um, what other bills are two closest to you that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, so we actually had some really great movement this year on things like student loan forgiveness. There were a few bills that we passed,
Hmm.
but they were specifically related to student loan forgiveness on sectors that we needed more people in. So, for example, mental health care,
Mm,
those who provide drug addiction services, which kind of do overlap a little bit, which
right.
was really great to work on, I think. Last year we did something similar. It was the governor's bill on law enforcement. I was kind of hoping we would do the same for teachers. So, like, if a teacher teaches for however many years, specifically in a rural area, we could provide student loan forgiveness faster than the federal government. I think that
Mm,
would go a really long way with retention and recruitment. But it was really heartening to see that we were beginning to, as a body, recognize the importance of sort of filling in those stopgaps. We also, unfortunately, the one bill that I got a lot of emails on was actually to protect the Okefenokee.
right.
Unfortunately, that bill did not pass, but I do encourage people to reach out to our senators, Senator Ossoff and Senator Warnock. From my understanding, I think specifically Senator Ossoff's team is looking at ways to designate it as a UNESCO heritage site. It is a
Mm,
heritage site, but it's not the right kind of heritage site list, I guess.
hmm.
But there is a way to protect it from that angle. So we're
Yeah,
hoping to maybe try to get around it there. Um, there was some back and forth on data centers,
yeah, I
to
saw
kind
that.
of take away their tax break. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually originally and this is kind of my favorite kind of legislation where
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure what I think about it, and I like to hear the arguments because, it's just you learn a lot. And
Yeah, for sure.
I originally was a yes on that bill, particularly from an environmental perspective.
Hmm.
But what had changed my mind was one of my colleagues, her district relies on jobs in data centers. And apparently, a lot of data centers now are moving towards like multiple elements of energy, like solar. So they are um, less, I guess, bad in terms of like energy consumption. So I
Okay.
learned a lot through that bill, and it did end up getting, it did not pass to
Right.
take away their tax
I
breaks,
saw
which
that.
was good because we need to study it a little bit more. But I learned a lot, right? I went in with
Hmm.
like one idea and I heard from my colleagues who had better experience than I did. I thought,
Okay.
okay, I've got new information. I'm going to adjust accordingly.
Yeah, and that's a great way of doing that. And I'm assuming your colleagues were from both sides of the aisle, maybe on the subject.
Oh, yeah. There were
Okay.
no's on both sides of the aisle. There were yeses on both sides of the aisle.
Okay.
Same thing with the film tax credit, by the way, which also didn't make it to the finish line. I remember going into because they were trying to reduce the film tax credit, and originally I went
Uh,
in as a no, and I actually walked out yes.
why?
And same thing, we had some because for me, I actually had a constituent, and again, this is like my favorite thing to tell people, and I hope
Mhm.
more people hear this. I had a constituent reach out to me, and she is in the film industry, and she told me about how, like, job to job, yes, it's not how much we're giving in tax breaks, but if you look at, for example, when a movie comes to a town, how much revenue it provides that town in
Mhm.
hotels, food, lodging, etc.
Right.
Um, and so she gave me some like really, really great information. And I found myself going, huh, maybe I don't fully agree with this. And I would much rather be able to study it more and the downward effects more.
Okay.
So it was just like really, really interesting. And then I think so sorry, now I mixed it up. I originally went in no, I ended
I
up
would.
being a
That's
yes.
what. Okay. That's
Right, right,
what I
right.
was.
I
Okay.
originally went in
That's
no,
what was
ended up being a yes.
confusing to
I
me. Okay.
confused myself. Hold on.
It's
See,
okay.
now
It's
I'm
okay.
confusing myself.
It's okay. Because
So
that
the
would be the
reason I
worst.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So the reason I went a yes is because of my constituent. And then I ended up being a no because the bill itself doesn't actually talk about the or it didn't address like the smaller um like how are they called? They're like little companies, right? Like there's little builds of film and then there's like the big budget films.
Yeah.
So the bill
Indies.
itself, correct. So the bill made a distinction between those two things. So what she
Mhm.
actually told me about wasn't
Yeah.
wasn't going to be impacted by this bill. So I ended up being a yes, but I would have I don't even think I would have considered a no on a bill like this because it meant more revenue for schools, as an example, had it not been for that constituent. So I
More revenue for schools because less tax credits. Is that
correct,
what you?
because right now we're losing out on revenue that these film studios, because they're big film studios, right? We're not talking about
Right.
the small budget films. We're talking about huge film studios
Right.
that are currently not paying taxes, even though they're using a lot of our roads, a lot of our infrastructure,
Right.
things like that.
But don't
Um,
they? But don't they bring? So okay, this is pedestrian a little bit on my part because I don't know
yeah,
all
yeah,
the
yeah,
facts on it. But I
totally.
would think because I think it was North Carolina or South Carolina ended
Yep,
theirs, and a lot we
yep,
got a lot of business moving south to our state,
yep.
and we're the
So that's
biggest one.
yeah, yeah. Normally I'm a yes on bills like this. I was a no
Okay,
for a little bit because of that constituent. So what happened because so many of us were no, they actually limited the bill on the House side. The reason it failed on
okay,
the Senate side is because they tried to expand it way further than a lot of us were comfortable with. And had it not been for that constituent, I wouldn't have even thought to ask my colleagues to limit the bill that way.
okay,
Yeah.
all right, all right.
Yeah, sorry.
Um,
I confuse, like, my yeses and my nos, but, like, I was just
well,
trying to explain that the details, like, again, for us, the details are where this kinda gets lost in the sauce, and so when we have, constituents come to us and say, "This is what I think about this bill," I can go to my colleagues and say, "Here's a concern I've heard. Normally, I would be a
mhm,
yes on this. Can you fix it?" And then they fixed it.
okay. So
Yeah.
it's interesting because when people are voting sometimes on legislation or resolutions that are not a yes or no, well, yes or no, but not for someone, let's say. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's written in such a way that if you put no or yes, it could be the wrong way of going, right?
Yep.
Of the way
Yep.
you'd want to, 'cause it's just
Yeah,
the
yeah,
way
yeah,
stuff is
yeah,
written.
and and part of the confusion, to be clear, like, you will sometimes see a legislator vote one way the first time on a bill and a
Hmm.
different way the second time on a bill, and it's because the bill changes in the process, right? For us as the
Sure.
House, we could pass a version of the bill, it goes to the Senate, it comes back a different version, or in committee. That's the other piece of, like, why I was originally, um, I became a no because of this constituent, because originally in the committee, because I do follow committee stuff too. Like if I know a bill
Hmm.
is definitely making it to the floor, I try to go back and watch the committee. So I remember watching the committee hearing and marking it down as a no, again, truly because of this constituent. And then the committee actually changed it to address the concerns that I had and
Uh-huh.
others had. And so
Uh-huh.
then it became a yes, because that's actually the best part of the legislative process.
Yes, it does. Everyone gets the 2 cents to put in on it. Did that bill end up having amendments to it? Or? No.
Yeah, it got amended in the Senate, and that's why it didn't pass at all.
Okay. Okay. Sometimes
Yeah,
unrelated stuff. Um,
correct.
there was another bill that ended up dying in the Senate, but I thought it was interesting. You had brought it up. It was the EMS, changing that to essential or identifying it as essential services.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that one.
That was actually my bill. I was incredibly grateful that House leadership allowed me to pass a bill as a freshman Democrat, which doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
Um, but that goes to show the importance of like building relationships and sort of treating this as a professional job like you would anything else, because it goes a
Hmm.
long way. And my husband's a part-time EMT, and I was chatting with his coworkers, and they said, "Yeah, we're not considered an essential service." And I go, "Why not?" And it's
Yeah.
because EMS actually started after law enforcement and fire. So law enforcement and fire have been around for almost a century.
Hmm.
EMS started in the 1970s. Sorry, they started in like the 1800s. EMS started in the 1970s. So it never
Okay.
got like put into all of these laws that we've created around EMS and fire, or around
Hmm.
police and fire. And so, what the bill would have done is it actually would have reduced a lot of red tape for our EMS personnel and frankly recognized them as the essential service that they are. It
Sure.
ran out of time on the Senate side. So my hope is if I get reelected, is to continue working on that bill and get it across the finish line.
Well, congratulations, because I know how difficult it is for a freshman to get their own bill.
Yeah.
And this was a really good bill. I'm just surprised it didn't
Thank
get
you.
passed this year.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised hearing you saying it wasn't essential services. Um, so,
A lot of people don't know
especially,
that. Yeah,
no,
only
I
50,
mean,
we would have been the 15th state to designate EMS as an essential service.
oh wow. Geez,
Yeah.
it's just, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder about how we do things. Um, was there other legislation that you'd like to? I know there was one that I saw, HB, no, Senate. Well, it was a Senate bill, so I don't even know if it went to the House. Senate Bill 233 was Georgia Promise Scholarship. It's a
Yeah.
$6,500 voucher for students attending lower performing public schools, but I guess that never got to the House. It looks like maybe, or
No, it unfortunately passed and got signed by the governor. I was
okay, so I
actually
thought,
in strong opposition to this bill. It passed the House by only one vote, and
hmm,
there
why
was
opposition?
yeah, there was actually bipartisan opposition to it. Only one Democrat voted in favor.
Hmm.
And the problem with bills like this, frankly, is that no matter which way you parse it, taking money out of public schools is not a solution. And you'll hear people say that we have spent a record amount of money on public schools this year, but we forget that after the Great Recession, we actually defunded education for almost 10 years, right? We have a hole
Mm-hmm.
that we still need to fill because of those 10 years and be able to meet our obligations now. And I feel like people forget that just because, yes, we're spending a lot of money on education right now, does not mean we've actually met our obligation. And what some of my colleagues think is that it's best to just let some kids leave these failing schools rather than just fixing the failing schools. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's a good path forward. The other thing is that the $6,500 that is technically supposed to be for a kid in a quote unquote failing school does not address um, uh, getting there, like transportation,
Mm-hmm.
any extra supplies that they might need, um, any extra expenses that might come up in tuition and fees. The majority of private schools in Georgia charge way more than $6,500.
Oh yeah, by far.
Yeah, and so for me personally, I don't like school vouchers. I would much rather, for example, allow a student to pick a public school in their county to go to.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I got. I grew up in Forsyth County, and each school had like a kind of what I call almost a magnet program, right? So
Right.
South Forsyth High School had the IB program, Central has the humanities program. So each of these high schools had something that would attract students. And if you signed up for those programs, you could go to that school even though it's not in your district. And I would much rather be able to have public schools compete together rather than move them to a private school system
Hmm.
where, by the way, these dollars, there's not a lot of good oversight for them because technically those who homeschool can use this money, but there is no way, for example, to claw back that money if it was being improperly used.
True. Yeah, I can see that. But and to your point about tuition being much higher than that 6,500, it's like double or triple that, depending where. And even with scholarships, you still can't. So, I mean, if you're going to do a voucher program, in my mind, it either has to be more money or you have to do it differently, like you said. Um, and quite frankly, I think we just need to change the way we do education altogether. And it's just
Yep.
not. I mean, yeah, it's just not working. And I think that it needs to be more attention than, personally, I feel it needs more attention than the first four grades, four
Yep.
years of education to get people, get the kids set in the right path before they
Yep.
even get to middle school.
And so
I
you
think
do
that,
that by having smaller class sizes,
yes,
reducing the standardized testing so that way teachers can teach students rather than teach a
yes,
test. They
yes.
can focus on them.
Hmm.
One thing I will say on education is we actually did pass another set of bills over the past 2 years about how we um, test if a kid is dyslexic, because right now what's
Hmm.
happening is that students are getting to the third and fourth grade, they can't actually read, but they've been able to get away with it because of like everything has pictures on it, and then in third and
Sure.
fourth grade those pictures go away and you realize,
Right.
oh no, this kid doesn't know how to read. We did pass legislation to have better testing for that kind of stuff earlier on so we can catch it earlier. And we are trying to kind of get to a place where other school systems have done this and they're now seeing their literacy rate just exponentially increase. It'll just take a little bit of time to fully set in.
Yeah. This type of thing takes a lot of political will to be able to do, to change.
Because you have to change
Schools,
the process. Yeah.
yes, process, the whole mental attitude of what people look at. And maybe they can do it nicely. Like
Yep.
instead of, yeah, Gwinnett County, I think, has had some issues so far.
Yeah.
But so we're done. So I'm curious, we're done with the house and stuff. What do you do the rest of the year for your job? Like,
Yeah.
what do you do?
So unless somebody is independently wealthy or retired, they go back to their work. In an election year, we are also campaigning. So our the primary is coming up here May 21st. I don't have a
That's right.
primary. Senator Islam doesn't have a primary, and our commissioner, Kirkland Cardin, doesn't have a primary.
Hmm.
Um, but if you are in the part of Peachtree Corners that has Sally Harrell, she does have a primary. So please
Hmm.
come out and make sure you vote. We also have a bunch of judgeships up for reelection, including a Supreme Court judge in Georgia.
Right.
So please make sure you go to the bottom of your ballot to vote on that.
Hmm.
There is also school board. So we have a school board seat that is open.
Hmm.
Again, go back to the bottom of your ballot to see that seat. And last but not least, there
And,
is
and that's so then people know that's a nonpartisan. So whoever
correct.
wins in this May 21st on the school board
Yeah.
is the school board person.
Yeah.
Okay.
So unlike, for example, myself and our commissioner and our
Right.
senators, we this is like the end for judges and school board. There might be a
Hmm.
runoff, but again, we can prevent one if we all come out
Right.
and vote.
Right.
And last but not least, there are two tax exemptions on our ballot. One is a broader tax exemption for a homestead exemption
Hmm.
that would save about $20-$30 a month for most people, which I know for some is a lot, but for some they're kind of like, what's the point? So
Hmm.
um, definitely make sure you vote on that. And then the one I personally signed on to and co-sponsored is the one for teachers and um, public any kind of public service employee to get an extra
Hmm.
tax exemption because it's becoming harder to afford to live in Gwinnett for those who provide our
Sure.
most needed services. So that's where we are.
All right. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not only difficult to live here, but it's also, and maybe that's why it's difficult to even hire. I mean, I know the
Yep.
school system has budget money
Exactly.
for
Exactly.
positions. They can't even find people to, and even the
Exactly.
police, Gwinnett police are like that.
Yeah.
It's sad when you have the money sitting there and you can't find anyone to fill the spot.
You know, it's interesting you say this. Unfortunately, Georgia law preempts HOAs from preventing companies from purchasing single family homes. And what we're seeing is all of these hedge funds are coming into states like Georgia
Hmm.
and buying single family homes and forcing all these prices to artificially kind of increase, and they're artificially reducing supply. Um, definitely that's something I want to be working on. This year, what I did is I actually co-sponsored legislation with Stephen Fry, and we actually co-wrote it. Where right now, if you buy a business, a
Right.
commercial space, you actually
Hmm.
get a tax break because it depreciates over time. What we're seeing is that these companies are getting that tax exemption for homes that appreciate in
Yes.
value over time.
Yes.
So they are actually double dipping.
Hmm.
And the way the bill, and unfortunately didn't move, and I hope it does next year, but the way the bill would have done it is that if a business bought a home and that
Hmm.
business owner does not live in Georgia, because I know sometimes like small business owners will like for asset purposes and stuff purchase it through their
Oh,
business.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, if the business owner does not live in Georgia,
Yeah.
they will no longer be like allowed to get that tax credit for lack of a better word and hopefully disincentivize some of this purchasing of single family homes. And I really want to repeal the law that
Right.
preempts HOAs from prevent, because I will tell you this, I think like 7 or 8 homes in my neighborhood have been bought by cash from hedge funds, and they put them on the market for like
Hmm.
an insane amount of money per month that is even higher than a mortgage. So
Yeah, I don't even understand how people can afford to pay that rent, actually.
right, right.
Unless what happens too sometimes is that they split pad the house, and you get four people, let's say, living in four separate rooms. And
Yep.
and I know in our neighborhood there's 84 homes there. At least I'm sure about three of them are are owned by companies like
Yeah.
American Federation Homes. I think is one of them.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, no, I
Yeah.
totally agree with you. I mean, my oldest son, he's like, he has enough money for a down payment, and he's like, why? There's not enough property out there for me to even look through to see what I want to buy because Vanguard and BlackRock and all these other
Exactly.
companies are out there purchasing. Yeah, so we're essentially becoming, as he says, and I agree, a subscription society, right? You can't buy Adobe software anymore, it's subscription.
Yep.
You can't buy
Yep.
stock photos, it's subscription. You can't buy
Yep.
your home, it'll be subscription essentially through a lease or rent.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of sad. Everything's like, and then you're so instead of owning it outright at some point, you're going to end up just continuing to pay someone who's making that
Exactly.
money. Yeah, it's a
Exactly. And
sad
that's an
thing.
important piece of wealth for people to be able to build
Mhm.
that wealth for themselves. So that's
Yeah,
why I'm in the state house. That's why I
yeah.
ran, is to try to kind of bring some of that sanity
It's,
back into our society.
yeah,
But yeah,
no, that's great. And I would love to see, I don't know if anyone's really done this. I think it was in Atlanta, maybe I saw something about maybe in Atlanta was like, I forget what the percentage was that was company owned. I'd love to see a study like that done in Gwinnett County, specifically, especially because I'm in Peachtree Corners,
yeah,
to see how many housing stock is owned percentage wise by
yeah.
these types of companies.
In
Yeah,
Atlanta, it's 35% of single family homes are owned by corporations.
that's nuts. That's just
I know.
crazy.
I
And
agree.
yeah, it's just,
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
awful.
if you already own a home, maybe that value, I mean, I get texted every day and,
Same.
you know, are you ready to sell? Or the
Yep.
messages are the weirdest things because like, it's me, it's Bobby again. And I'd like to know, from our discussion last time, are you ready now? And I'm like, we didn't even talk last time. What's going on?
We started getting, so we were very lucky. We actually got our home right before like the market went really crazy during COVID. So that was the
Mhm.
only reason we could afford it, was like right when the market was perfect. But within a month of us moving into our house, we started getting solicitation to sell it.
And the
Yeah.
value has gone up. I think I have to, um, what do you call it? I just got my tax bill from
Yep.
Gwinnett County, or the not the assessment. I'm looking at it and I'm like,
Yep.
really? Where do they? I even called them up and I said, how is this figured out? Can you guys give me a formula? No one can give me a formula. And it's just like, are you kidding me? You think
Yeah.
it's this much? That's crazy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so
So, we want
mhm,
more people involved in this process. The more of y'all
mm,
that come down to people's house, the less influence these other special interests have. So I always love to invite people to come down and talk to us about this kind of stuff.
good.
Um, but really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, and I'm always
Yeah.
open to meet with people to talk about legislation. We try to host what I call mini town halls, so I'll go sit around coffee shops in the district.
Okay.
Usually it's either Peachy Corners, even though it's not in my district, I do try to go down there. 45 South Cafe, You and Me Coffee, and Break
Mm,
Coffee are usually where we kind of try
that's
to like
good.
spread out across the district.
Yeah, yeah.
But I usually post up there for a few hours about once a month for folks to come down and chat. So
Okay, cool. Um, and I'm gonna have you give your website and all that. It'll be in the show notes also. But
Yeah.
before we get there, it'd be remiss in not acknowledging the things going on internationally a little bit. We had spoken about that. You'd be cool talking about it a little bit. You're the only Palestinian in the state house on either side, I think, right,
Yeah.
of the house. Um, how does that? By the way, how does that feel? I mean, how have has it been fine
Not
or
even a
no?
little bit. Um,
Okay.
I think it feels like my obligations have sort of burst past the boundaries of our district, for lack of a better word. I am the only
Hmm.
elected Palestinian in the state and much of the Southeast. The only other elected Palestinian is Sam Rasool up in Virginia. So it's just the two of us,
Okay.
which meant that a lot of Palestinians, regardless of whether or not they're in our district, are coming to us and asking us for help to sort of navigate what resources they can use. It's mostly to either get their family out or get food in, has
Mm,
been sort of the biggest ask of people. And so it's been hard. I have tried to be as communicative as possible with the public. I really do try to shy away from interviews, but this is a very serious moment. And I know that I have a platform and I have a duty to use it. And so I try really
mhm,
hard to educate people, to get them to sort of understand a perspective they might not have thought about, and to recognize that at the end of the day, we are dealing with people.
mm,
They're not human shields. They are women, men, and children who had nothing to do with what's going on and had no voice in what's going on. And I've always believed in protecting lives, all life, as much as possible, and that is where my advocacy in politics will continue to go.
okay. Good to hear. Appreciate you sharing that with us.
Of course,
Um,
thanks.
if people want to reach out to you or find out a little bit more
Yeah.
about what you're doing, where can they find that information?
You can sign up for our newsletter. You can send a contact form, which goes to my email at Ruwa, the number for Georgia.com. You'll also find us under the same handle, Ruwa for Georgia, everywhere. We're on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter. If you're interested and social media is something you're passionate about, I am currently hiring a social media fellow. I didn't have a primary, so I'm in a big like hiring spree. So if you're interested in getting politically involved, reach out.
Oh, excellent. Good. And I see you on TikTok, so it's all good. You're doing a good
Right.
job out there. You and
Thanks.
Scott Hilton, I saw him on there too a little bit.
We
Um,
try.
I appreciate you sharing time with me today
Of
and
course.
talking about these things. Yeah, we'll
Thanks for
get
having me.
together. No, and we'll get together again soon about more things that are going on, I'm sure. So hang in
Hopefully.
there for a second, but thank you everyone for joining us. Peachtree Corners Life. We're working on, what are we working on? We're working on the next issue of Peachtree Corners magazine, the best of issue. You could always find more information at livinginpeachtreecorners.com. Follow us also on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, and if you're listening to the podcast, Spotify or iHeartRadio, YouTube, and all that. And we are on TikTok also as well. We're putting out some stuff, so it's all good. It's all good. Thank you, everyone.